Good afternoon and welcome to Who Gets a Say, a panel on voting rights in Florida, sponsored by the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University in conjunction with the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs and the Shepard Broad Distinguished Lecture Series. My name is Ana Menéndez. I am an associate professor with the Department of English and the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at FIU. I will be co-moderating today's panel with the wonderful Julio Capó Jr., Associate Professor of History and Deputy Director of the WPHL. On behalf of our director, Rebecca Friedman, we welcome everyone to this afternoon's vital discussion. Today we will be in conversation with our two distinguished panelists, Melba Pearson and Dexter Filkins. Melba Pearson, a former prosecutor and ACLU of Florida Deputy Director, is now the Director of Policy and Programs for the Center for the Administration of Justice at FIU. Dexter Filkins, a journalist, prize-winning author of The Forever War, and a writer for The New Yorker. We are very thrilled and privileged to welcome all of you today. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. It was a landmark piece of legislation to prohibit racial discrimination in voting. 55 years later, many inequities remain, even as the rise of digital media is creating new ones. In recent years, we've seen the rise of voter suppression campaigns, as well as efforts to erode the act itself. Florida, electorally divided, is poised once again to be at the center of a historical reckoning with voting rights, particularly as they pertain to Black voters. Dexter, I'd like to start with you because your recent piece in The New Yorker inspired this panel. In your article, Who Gets to Vote in Florida, published this past September, you traced the evolution of Amendment 4, which was meant to restore the voting rights of felons who had served their time. In 2018, background for people who have not been following it, an overwhelming number of Florida voters approved the amendment, but 6 months later, the Republican-dominated legislature ruled that the ex-felons would not be allowed to cast a ballot until they paid all the fines associated with their sentence, effectively re-disenfranchising as many as 770 Florida residents, about half of whom are Black. That law was recently upheld by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, locking out these potential voters from this particular election. Dexter, can you talk a little bit about what you found in your reporting? You grew up in Florida and you were a longtime reporter for the Miami Herald. And yet, reading that incredible piece, I got the sense that even you seemed surprised by the state of voting rights here.
Yeah, I had no idea. I think I was, I live in New York, but I read the Florida papers every day, and I was watching Amendment 4. I thought it was an amazing event to see, 65% of the Florida voters basically say, we forgive you to felons, and we're going to restore your voting rights. And then as soon as it passed, the legislature came down and said, not so fast. We're not hold on. You got to pay up first. And that kind of caught my attention. So I just started talking to people. I went down there, I went to the state. I did not expect to find what I found. And I think the story here is that Amendment 4, and particularly what the legislature did with Amendment 4, is just kind of part of a much larger story. And that larger story, I think, is it begins. Obviously, Florida, as a member of the old Confederacy, has a long history of voter suppression, but this is sort of the modern version of it. And for me, I think it started in 2000 after the fiasco of Bush-Gore. The voting rules were greatly expanded in Florida. The legislature was embarrassed by what happened. They made it very easy to vote. And then you had the two elections of Barack Obama in 2008 and 2016, and he won the state both times. He did it with, I think, a coalition, Black people, young people, college-educated voters. It scared the hell out of the Republican Party because they look at their constituency. It's getting older. It's very white. It's not getting any bigger, and that begun. So basically 10 years ago. That begun, I think, a very systematic effort to tighten the voter eligibility. And basically, a series of efforts unfolded that make it harder for people to vote. And so, and I think, you know, the takeaway from this is what the Republican strategy has been, is to make it harder to vote, to keep turnout down, because that helps them. And so the harder it is to vote and the lower the turnout, the better it is for their candidates. And, you know, I mean, I had Republicans tell me that, and it's kind of shocking, but the record is very, very clear. Usually the pretext is voter fraud, but, you know, you can't really find any voter fraud. So, but this is kind of, it's like, here we are in 2020, and the race between Biden and Trump in Florida is very, very close. It's basically the margin of error. We don't know who's going to win. And when you look at what the Republican Party is doing right now, it's doing kind of more of the same. And for instance, the Secretary of State of Florida, Laurel Lee, Republican appointed, just sent a letter out to all the county voter supervisors saying, you have to have, you know, guards protecting the voting sites round the clock. I mean, basically an impossible request, and she had very questionable authority to do it. But the point is, they're still doing it, and that is make voting harder on the pretext of fraud, to keep turnout lower, and that works for them. I think, you know, we'll see on November 3rd, or probably late that night or in November 4th, whether it works.
Thank you, Dexter. Julio, can you give us a little bit of a historical perspective on this?
Yeah, you know, as I was preparing my comments, one, let me just start by saying it's such an honor to be here with you, Anna and Dexter and Melba, and thank you so much for this necessary conversation. So you know, it's utmost important always, but especially right now. As I was preparing my thoughts here, there's just so many examples that I could have given, and I decided to start with kind of an earlier moment, and here in South Florida, right at FIU. I thought I'd talk just very briefly about a man named John Sewell, whose name is often forgotten today, but he was Miami's third mayor. You know, I think it's absolutely necessary to think about this moment of voting that's free of coercion, of intimidation and discrimination and inequity. The historical record is just rife with these kinds of examples. In the early 1900s, Sewell joked about the convenience and the manipulation of what he called his black artillery. That was the phrase he used. As with the kind of formal incorporation of Miami as a city, it's very much a new city, just incorporated formally in 1896. Black women and men labored in service of white colonial projects, right, including the building and mostly the infrastructure of Miami that so many white people capitalized on, right, of course. In fact, Black laborers were among those very few, just 344 men, right, not women, who in July 1896 voted to incorporate the city of Miami. And through a number of coercive and practices that were often tied to exploitative labor practices that were upheld and maintained by anti-Black violence and policies, white urban power brokers, those who were making the big decisions in the city, used the Black vote as a as an example, as a way of maintaining white supremacy. Whenever they, to get what they needed and wanted, Sewell made clear, for example, what he called his Black artillery was how he maintained power. He said whenever he wanted to influence or manipulate a local election, he'd have his Black laborers register to vote and coerce them or use his influence to persuade them to vote the way he wanted them to. So these Black laborers had everything to risk, right? Their livelihoods, their very lives in the Jim Crow South and in a city that openly joked about or threatened with or committed and certainly enacted things like lynchings and arbitrary incarceration and coercive labor and so much more, dealing with questions of keeping Black people down. The city was founded on these very principles, and it has, as we have seen, persisted, as Dexter just noted, in many ways and manifestations. Melba, with all of this in mind, I was wondering if you could tell us about the legacy and the impact and the work that you do and the work that the ACLU at Florida does today. How can we best support efforts to protect voting rights?
Sure. So thank you for that question, Julio. And again, it is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you. So I want to back up for a second and then, talk about the present day. So we have to remember to examine all of this from the context of Reconstruction. Because if you remember, we had our Civil War, and then during that period of Reconstruction was when we saw the rise of people of color, most notably African Americans, in holding elected office and, trying to build property and to build a life here after they were torn from their homelands, brought here forcibly, in service of slavery. So now, as this new power base started to expand, the white power structure, and you keep in mind, these are the former plantation owners, slave owners, who now looking around and have lost their source of free labor, are now seeing, African Americans moving up to a position of almost equality to them. And to them, that was very threatening to everything that they held dear. So that began the Black codes. That began the criminalization of everyday life for African Americans, and using that as a way to disenfranchise people. So saying you now have a conviction, even though it was completely baseless or it's just, based on nonsense, now you no longer have access to the vote. And there's plenty of transcripts and, from back in those days when, different elected officials were talking about how they intentionally wanted to disenfranchise Black and brown people. So then you fast forward to, get the civil rights movement and how, folks are marching and the Voting Rights Act gets signed as part of, the broader civil rights package to honor the legacy of Dr. King and so many others who, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, so many that lost their lives in the quest for equality. Now is what I like to call how Jim Crow grew up and is now James Crow Esquire. So now he's gotten very sophisticated, and it's about voter, what identification can you use to vote? It has to be something specific, which then becomes problematic. Let's say a driver's license. Many people take a driver's license for granted, but if you don't have the money to buy a car, sort of like, then why are you going to go get a driver's license, right? You may be relying on a different form of picture ID that could still accomplish the same thing. But by narrowing the scope, you're able to eliminate certain people from certain socioeconomic backgrounds, right? And then as you keep moving forward, now you start to be creative. You look at, well, do we want polling places or ballot drop boxes on college campuses? That's something as when I was deputy director of the ACLU of Florida in 2018, we, fought with, and this was a bipartisan effort, right? So we had young Republicans coming out and speaking about why it's so important for them to have a voting place on their campus, as well as young Democrats and, folks who had no party affiliation. Again, it was about access to the ballot box. And by raising awareness, we were able to put pressure on the supervisor of elections to expand polling places to include college campuses. And so, you see that type of victory, and then you see now across the country how they're trying to restrict where you can place ballot drop boxes, and again, pointing to the letter, the advisory opinion that came out saying that, oh, you need to have an armed guard 24/7. Is someone actually going to pick up the box and run away with it? Like, what is the real threat here, right? Oh, wait, the threat is that people might actually use it and lift their voice up. So for me, how to best support these efforts to beat back voter suppression and voter intimidation is, number one, educate yourself, right? And learn about what the proper protocols are to vote. What do you need to be able to vote? And make sure that you're part of that process of not only educating yourself, but now in turn, educating others. So that way you don't have a situation where someone shows up to the poll with the wrong identification because they didn't know. Right? You have to be part of that army of spreading correct information. And also, if you see something, say something. The folks, the election protection folks at 866-OUR-VOTE, that is not only their hotline number, it's also their website. So you can sign up to do voter protection, which basically means you're monitoring polling sites, because now, unfortunately, the current incumbent in the White House, does not particularly believe in fair and free elections. So he's made statements, telling, people like the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, and encouraging people to quote unquote monitor the polling areas. Well, the problem with that is, if you are not a trained poll worker, what exactly are you doing as a monitor, right? Are you just going to videotape people while they're trying to vote? That could be perceived as voter intimidation, right? So if you are someone who is online at a polling place and you see this type of behavior, number one, you should tell a poll worker, but also number two, you must call 866 our vote. The reason why is because, number one, they're trained on these issues, and then they're also going to track the patterns. So if they see one particular polling station is having an uptick in these issues, they can come, send out a team to investigate what's going on. And I'm talking within minutes. This is not like a day-long type of thing. If they're getting an influx of calls, they will respond almost immediately, and then also liaison with law enforcement, whether it be local law enforcement or the FBI, because again, it is a federal crime if you are trying to prevent people from voting. So you have to make sure to educate yourself. If you see something, say something, but most importantly, you have to show up to vote, because if voting wasn't so important, folks wouldn't be twisting themselves sideways and bending over backwards to take away your right to do so. So the way to fight back is to show up, and to show up in record numbers. And, I'm going to end on this point. I saw a really great graphic. And it was more of like a cartoon where an African-American man had literally like a beach chair on his back, and he had a cooler, and he had a radio, and he had a whole bunch of things. And his purportedly his partner is like, oh, where are you headed? He's like, to go vote. Because he was prepared if it was a situation, unfortunately, like we've seen in Georgia and so many other states, where you're waiting in line for 3, 4, 5 hours in the sun to vote. Come prepared, come with some water, come with a snack, but, be prepared to wait, because your vote is your voice, and it is too critical to let anyone deter you or to take that away from you.
Thank you so much, Melba. Can I just repeat 866 our vote, right? That's correct?
Yes, OURVOTE. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think Anna might have frozen. I think this is right. So I'm gonna, oh, yes, she did. So I'm gonna step in, and Dexter, I was wondering if you could tell us, this is a little bit about recent Florida electoral history, including the massively flawed purging of ex-felons that might have swung the 2000 election. Why do Florida elections always come down to the wire? I mean, to say the least.
Well, but Florida is really interesting because, look, if you take the really big states that are swing states, which is to say they could go either way, and they're really, really important. California, it goes Democratic every time. Texas, Republican. Maybe not this time, but historically it's been Republican. Florida is like a microcosm of America. And so it's, you got the Deep South in the north. You got New York City and Fort Lauderdale and Miami Beach. You've got the Midwest in Tampa. You've got African-American voters scattered throughout the state. There's Puerto Ricans in Orlando. It's like the whole thing. And so, like America, it's really, really polarized. And so I think what struck me is that you can see just by the presidential polls how polarized the state is. It's like in most polls right now, Biden is leading by like 2%, 49 to 47. That's basically a wash. That's basically meaningless. But what's interesting about that is that despite the fact that Florida is extremely polarized and very, very close, the Republican legislature and the Republican and the state house, the Republicans have controlled both houses of the legislature and the governor's mansion since 1999, every year without interruption. And so, and that's kind of counterintuitive, because if the state is polarized and the Democrats essentially are 50% of the vote, they should have 50% of the seats, but they don't have them. And why is that? And I think that's what brings us here. This is part of the playbook. And really, when I was reporting my story and it became kind of more evident to me what was happening, you know, that the Republican strategy is essentially to drive down voter turnout, particularly among groups that vote Democratic. I thought somebody is going to give me like the secret recording from the meeting, you know, like there's God, because I know they must have these meetings, and somebody someday is going to come forward with a recording, and it's gonna be everybody sitting around the table saying, okay, guys, like, how do we make it really hard to vote? You know, how do we do it? And because that's what they're doing. It's a playbook, and it's super explicit. They're doing it right now, and it's been remarkably successful in keeping Florida Republican in Republican control, even though it's not a Republican state.
Thank you. What did I miss? Sorry, I lost internet connection there.
A stunning laboratory.
I'm back. I don't know if you already spoke to this, Dexter, but one of the things that I did not know about that I read about in your piece was this massively flawed purging of the voter rolls before the 2000 election that some people think may have actually helped determine that outcome. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't know if anybody knows, you know, out there really knows about this.
I didn't know about it. You know, when you do the weird thing about working for the New Yorker is you just have like a lot of time, and so you just talk to a lot of people. And somebody somewhere said to me, you know, the 2000 election, everybody remembers it because it's like Bush Gore and it was really close. But the really interesting thing is the purge that happened right beforehand. And then, you know, I called all these people. It took me forever, and finally, I found. Like after several weeks of calling people, I found this guy, now retired, sitting in California. He's been waiting for years for someone to call him and ask him about this. But what happened? The story is that there was the Republican Party, and specifically the Secretary of State, which at the time was not Catherine Harris, but very quickly became. And under Jeb Bush, they decided to undertake a purge of felons on the voter rolls, because as we know, the Florida Constitution says if you are a felon, you may never vote again. And so they kind of set out, as they said, to purge the voter rolls of felons. But they were so aggressive and so sloppy, and I frankly, I think intentionally sloppy, it's pretty clear, that they didn't just get felons, and in fact, it turned out there weren't that many felons. They got just thousands and thousands and thousands of others and people who were not convicted of felonies, and those people were kind of overwhelmingly Black and other minorities, but they were definitely likely Democratic voters, and it was remarkable. And I remember, for instance, I talked to a wonderful guy named Ion. He has a great name too, Ion Sancho, who for 28 years was the supervisor of election in Leon County, which is Tallahassee. And he was, in 2000, he was running the county's, you know, the election supervisor's office. He gets a letter from Catherine Harris, the Secretary of State, saying, we have identified 764 felons that are on your voter rolls. We are instructing you to remove them immediately because it's illegal. And Sancho was skeptical, so they started looking really carefully, and they started looking at the, you know, the felon records and stuff, and they realized that the list was like a joke, and it was overwhelmingly wrong. And it took them a long time, and they figured out that it wasn't 764 felons on the list; it was like 21. So it was like orders of magnitude wrong. And I think what became clear was what became overwhelmingly clear was that it was an intentional effort to basically knock off as many minorities, which is to say likely Democratic voters, from the voter rolls around the state as they could before the 2000 election. And they succeeded. And so really at an absolute minimum, there were 20,000 people who were improperly knocked off the rolls. The presidential election was decided by 537 votes. So there you go. I mean, it was decisive, potentially decisive many times over. That really aggressive purge of felons.
It was an astonishing revelation to me because I was not aware of that either. Melba, right now the Herald just broke a story yesterday with the UK's Channel 4 about efforts to deter the vote during the 2016 election on behalf of the Trump campaign. And this is something that they were able to show through Cambridge Analytica data that we were doing. It's an astonishing story that the Herald just broke. Melba, where is the line? We have negative advertising. When does that become deterrence, let's say? And where does it become voter suppression? Where does it become illegal?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great question. So, first of all, let's examine Cambridge Analytica, right? Because this is not an issue in a vacuum. Cambridge Analytica, their job is to basically use data and use, software and different techniques to topple elections. Period, end of story. That's their business, right? And we saw that they had a very heavy role in Brexit. So they were very much pushing the Leave campaign because that was their client. And so, and the sad part was, I think the most Googled search phrase in the UK the day after Brexit was, what does Brexit mean? So many people had just fallen prey to this social media disinformation campaign and never verified, like, okay, they're saying leave. Okay, so I'm going to vote leave, without thinking through what leave meant for their day-to-day life. Right? So that was one example. They did something similar, I believe, in the elections in Trinidad and Tobago. They did something similar. So they had been practicing on a smaller scale for years in advance. And so now it was only a matter of time before it affected the US elections. Obviously, we saw some meddling from the Russian government and other bad actors who did not want us to have a fair and free election. But someone like Cambridge Analytica, unfortunately, they were in partnership with Facebook. And so many people, millions of people around the country utilize Facebook, not only to connect with friends, but to hang out and watch videos and all of that. And then they become susceptible to disinformation because, again, oh, it's your friend sharing this, or a group that seems to be aligned with your values is sharing this particular video. So then it must be accurate, right? So then you have that as a very dirty but gray area with regards to politics. But what we're also seeing is a shift towards, again, just more aggressive, out and out, intimidation tactics. I will point to the story that broke in the Herald this week of the police officer from the city of Miami who showed up to a polling place in full uniform with his gun visibly present on his hip, as well as a mask, advocating for his candidate of choice. Spoiler alert, it wasn't Joe Biden. And also he had profanity written across the mask as well. And so the message that was there, I mean, it's one thing, listen, everybody has the right to vote and you can support whatever candidate you want, but it is against the law to basically electioneer, which is advocating for a particular candidate in the polling station. So there's 150, I think it's 150 yards, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a rule as to how far you can go with campaign signs and literature and all of that. That is why when you come to a polling place, everybody's sort of attacking you with slates and paraphernalia right as you enter, because they cannot get closer to the actual polling place. So what he did was basically break that law, as well as act in an intimidating manner, because if you're walking around a polling place in full uniform as a member of law enforcement, clearly advocating for a particular candidate, that can be, number one, voter intimidation, because you're, average person, you're like, the dude with the gun is basically telling me non-verbally who to vote for. So you have that, issue going on. And then, of course, like I touched on earlier, the concept of people who are going to watch the polls who are not actually trained as poll workers. They are just being sent out to just, basically intimidate people. So we have, all these issues percolating, as well as looking at, granted, Florida is not an open carry state, thank God, because you're looking at states like Michigan and others that have had, armed people go into the Capitol building, basically threatening lawmakers, legislators, and of course, as we now later learned, threatened to kidnap the governor of Michigan as well as Virginia over, political differences. So we're seeing this underbelly of, more violent action. And it just perturbs me as a general premise, because we as America love to go to other countries and dictate, well, this is how a proper democracy should work. This is what free and fair election should look like. But the tone and tenor over the course of the last 4 years is shifting to that of a developing country that we often sit in our armchairs and criticize. But when you have a situation where people don't feel free to go to the voting stations, who are worried that armed people are going to, basically threaten them or scare them, or that law enforcement, who is supposed to be protecting and serving, is interfering, that is a recipe for disaster. So, this is where my concerns lie. And unfortunately, we look at a Supreme Court that is now skewing a lot more conservative and wanting to move away from some of the traditionally held values that we, could rely on. But listen, they're going to uphold more access to the ballot box. They're starting to move away from that. So the change will have to come on a legislative level, which means people have to vote for legislators and governors and congresspeople and senators who are aligned with expanding the right to vote rather than contracting it.
Thank you, Melba. Yes, I mean, I think it's also important to separate the partisanship from this, right? Because at the moment, and in the last election, of course, there was a very heavy Republican push to suppress the vote in various ways. But the important thing is that, anybody could suppress the vote if they're allowed, if they're not being watched. And that's the important thing, is to make sure that we maintain that sanctity of the ballot and maintain everybody's right to vote, especially when they've been granted it. And so I want to go back just briefly to Dexter's piece, just a personal interest that I have. You profile Betty Riddle, who was an ex-felon who turned her life around and was able to vote in the presidential primary. And you have this, I'm just going to quote briefly from it. She says she rose at 6 a.m. and put on a t-shirt with an inscription that she devised: first in line, first time voting. And she, at the age of 62, cast her first ballot, and she called it a gift from heaven. Now, thanks to recent ruling, her ability to vote in this election is in doubt, or has been lost. And I wonder if you've been in touch with her.
Yeah, I have been in touch with her. She's a pretty remarkable person. But she, as you said, she voted in the April primary, and that was when basically the legislature had passed their law saying you got to pay first. But because she was a plaintiff in the case, and because the case was unfolding in the courts, she was allowed to go forward. But now with the 11th Circuit's decision, and it doesn't look like that's going to go before the U.S. Supreme Court after all, she's got to pay, basically. And I think, the trouble with all these felons is it's not just that they can't pay, it's that if they ask the state how much they owe, the state can't tell them. And so there's testimony from the federal trial in Tallahassee where they have state officials saying, like, we have no idea how much these people owe. It's probably going to take us 4 or 5 years to figure out, like, who owes what. The best that Betty can determine is that she owes a couple $1,000s. I'd like to. She doesn't have the money. I can't really do that as a journalist, but I've told her to set up like a GoFundMe site. But there is an organization that has raised a ton of money, including they got a lot of money from Michael Bloomberg to pay off the fines of a lot of these felons. It won't, even with Bloomberg's money, it'll just be a fraction of them. But I think Betty's gonna get the money, and it looks pretty good right now. She's gonna get the money and she's gonna vote. And I think she told me the other day that somebody from the Biden's campaign is gonna go vote with her. somebody from Sarasota County. So that'll be a nice scene.
That's great news. Thank you.
I just want to also throw in one, point of education and clarification on this issue. So when we talk about the concept of people with felony convictions being able to vote, remember, Florida was an outlier in the country. Florida was with only 4 other states that didn't allow an opportunity for people to be able to get their rights to vote back after they've completed their sentence. Meaning, like, as soon as you got out of the jailhouse doors, right? We're not talking about fines, fees, and all of this. It's literally you finished your sentence or you finished your term of supervision and you were able to vote. So what we did by getting Amendment 4 passed put us in line with the rest of the country. And then on the other extreme, quote unquote extreme, it's not really extreme, Maine and Vermont, if you are a resident of those states, you never lose your right to vote, even if you go through the criminal justice system. So while you are incarcerated, whether it's in jail or in prison, you are able to vote. You never lose your right to vote. Now, extrapolate from that what you will based on the demographics of those 2 states. But, at the end of the day, those 2 states haven't fallen apart, right? Nobody can sit there and argue that, oh, Maine and Vermont are just like, those 2 states are a hot mess. No, right? Like they have a thriving democracy, they have a good economy, so clearly this is the example of where we should be moving towards, which is more access and more people being able to use their voice to say, what their school should look like, what their road should look like, what their government should be like. And, at the end of the day, both parties have equal opportunity to reach out to the voters to give them their message. And it should be up to the voters to make a decision based on the information they're receiving. Obviously, trust but verify, right? You have to verify everything that you're seeing and, make sure that you're not being a victim to disinformation. But at the end of the day, both parties have equal access. So the fact that one party is trying to just suppress the vote rather than state their case is, very problematic on a lot of levels, and also shows that they're out of step with the American people. Because if you can't get your message to resonate and you have to rely on dirty tricks to be able to stay in power, then obviously it's about power, not about the people.
Thanks for that, Melba. As I've been listening to all this, one of the things that I'm going back to your point about James Crow Esquire, for example, is one of the manifestations, one of the new manifestations of all this. And one of the things that concerns me, and I think concerns lots of people, is the way that this has found release, that is the disenfranchisement possibly finding release through coronavirus, right? That is that the different ways that coronavirus and the politics around coronavirus can lead to voter suppression or to intimidation or fear. I just got, my shirt is floral and a little tacky, which I like, but so it's hard to see, but I just voted by, I submitted my thing by mail and everyone was wearing a mask and it felt very safe and it felt, everything I needed. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you think the issue of COVID-19, for instance, has kind of taken shape in terms of people's access to the vote more generally this cycle.
Yeah, well, I think what's become very interesting is that vote by mail is now part of the mainstream, right? Because, I can speak personally. I have always been an early voter, right? So early voting, I know I can get, sadly, again, another testament to where we are with voting in America. You know that there's going to be fairly low turnout during the weekdays of early voting. So I know I can get in and out in 5 minutes, cast my ballot and get back to work. So I was never one to subscribe to the theory of voting by mail per se, right? But obviously with the advent of the pandemic, you're looking for ways to be able to cast your ballot safely. So I signed up to vote by mail for the first time, which I found to be easy and accessible. And I actually heavily encourage because it gives you time to actually review your ballot, research the candidates, take your time, and be able to ask questions, especially when it comes to the amendments and some of the other ballot initiatives that the wording may be a bit deceptive. So the vote by mail became the great equalizer from the standpoint of you don't need postage, you don't need a ride, right? You can, just as long as you can get access to a mailbox, you're able to cast your vote. And then of course, the other option, if time was too tight, of being able to go to the ballot box and just drop it off at any early voting location or at the supervisor of elections main headquarters. So it's literally like a mailbox. You go through, there's a person there, they check your ID, they look at your ballot, they give it all back to you, and then you're able to vote without having to get out of your car or worry about contact with people. But then, you know, we heard the disinformation coming from the incumbent in the White House talking about how, oh, voting by mail isn't safe, even though he voted by mail multiple times, you know, and that whole states like Colorado and Oregon and other states have like a universal, you know, vote by mail. So everybody gets a ballot mailed to them, and, you know, you can feel free to mail it back, and that's that. So it flies in the face of the logic of how other states have been operating their elections without fraud, without problems for many years. So there was this whole deterrence because, again, if you're not turning out in person, then how do they get that last minute access to you? How do campaigns be able to shove that slate at you, you know, for the last time? And so again, rather than upping your game and responding to the fact that people are now voting in a different way, you now look for new ways to suppress the vote. So for instance, we saw how the Republican Party in California put up fake drop boxes to capture people's, you know, ballots. Again, why? Right? Like that just the level of depravity that you have to think that this is a good idea. You know, you could have instead of putting up those boxes, you could have invested money in doing social media ads or doing a mailer to people who are persuadables, right? But I guess they've sat down and figured the numbers and said the only way we can win in California is to literally steal people's ballots. So, you know, when you see all of these adaptations for bad rather than for good, you know, again, it makes you realize the importance of voting and the importance of making sure that the people who are making the decisions around access to the ballot box, whether it be your supervisor of elections, whether it be your secretary of state, you know, whoever's your key player around these issues, you have to make sure that they are aligned with your values. And many times, if there's an election for a supervisor of elections, so for instance, we're going to have one in Miami in 2 years. So, you know, folks kind of skip over that, right? Like people are very focused on the president, maybe the governor, maybe your congressperson or your senator, but you don't hit all of these down ballot races. This is one of the key reasons why you really have to look at each and every race, each and every candidate, and make sure that you are voting for someone who is aligned with your values. Because if not, you end up with the perpetuation of these types of scams and schemes to take away your right and your voice. And, you know, I just want to add one more data point before I cede my time. But what was very interesting was after Amendment 4 passed, right? And then you saw the legislature, you know, go into session and basically strip it back. They also were passing a bill that made it more difficult for grassroots groups to get citizens initiatives on the ballot, because Amendment 4 was a citizens initiative, right? You went out, you collected, you know, we collected as part of a huge coalition, close to 1 million signatures to get this on the ballot, as well as appear before the Florida Supreme Court to make sure that the language was proper. But what they did was that they made it more difficult for you to pay canvassers to be able to collect signatures. Because again, volunteers can only do so much. You need to have a paid component to be able to put something on the ballot. And so they made it difficult for you to be able to get citizens initiatives on the ballot. And then right now, there is an amendment pending in Florida that's on the ballot in November that would require citizens initiatives, like ballot initiatives, to go through 2 electoral cycles, making voters have to vote on the same potential change twice, in the hopes of making it more difficult for an Amendment 4 type situation to ever rise up again. And let me be very clear. The ballot initiative that I'm talking about is also called Amendment 4. Why? Because they're trying to rely on the marketing that happened in 2018 when everybody in their mind was, oh yes, vote yes on Amendment 4. Right now, you need to vote no on Amendment 4 because it makes it more difficult for the people's voice to be heard.
Thank you for that, Melba. The naming the Amendment 4 to the parallel. Thank you for that, Anna.
No, I was going to say that we have about 15 minutes left in this panel. So I wanted to let everyone know they can submit questions through the Q&A function below. Any questions for Dexter or Melba or Julio, please do so. We're going to be wrapping it up in about 10 minutes. I have a question for, I don't know who might be able to speak to this, and maybe it has something to do with the coronavirus. And these numbers may be a little bit outdated, but as of October 13th, Florida had received a total of 904,217 mail-in ballots from Democrats and 519,875 from Republicans. Those numbers I'm sure have changed and maybe they've equalized, but I was interested in that discrepancy.
Well, can I address that? I think that's because President Trump has banged the drum and said it's totally corrupt. He sort of added an addendum to that at some point and said voting by mail in Florida is okay. But I just want to address, this is sort of a bit of good news amid all of this, or interesting news at least, that has to do with mail-in voting. So your numbers are basically correct. I think so far 1.6 million Democrats have voted by mail and about 1.1 million Republicans. So the Democrats are ahead. But the important thing about mail-in voting is they're being counted as we speak in Florida. And what that means is when the polls close on Tuesday, basically by 7:30 p.m., all of the mail-in ballots, and that's about half the votes, are just going to go up. They're just going to be posted. So I'm pretty confident, having spoken to a lot of supervisors of elections around the state, I think Florida is going to actually have results late Tuesday night, maybe early Monday, Wednesday morning. The reason why that's really important is this. Biden can win the election without Florida. Trump cannot. Trump has to win Florida. And what that means is if we get results on Tuesday night and Biden beats Trump, the election's over, basically. It's finished. So there's basically no conceivable path for Trump to victory without Florida. And so they can be fighting in Pennsylvania and fighting in Michigan and stabbing each other in Texas. But if Biden beats Trump in Florida on Tuesday night, we basically know who the winner of the election is. It's Biden.
I would just briefly add something to that, it's also, it needs to be said that the relationship to mask wearing, for example, that the candidates have treated this very differently, right? That is, so if to talk about, so many of these polling places, right, have opted to not enforce wearing masks. That's this kind of policy. And I think that there is a difference in the voter who would understand that to be a kind of almost coming from the presidential policy, or to, that the practice here is important to understanding who's going to be voting early, who's going to be not voting early, who's going to be attending, going to the polls in larger numbers. That this is where I was kind of concerned about the actual presence of people at these spaces, because there's so much kind of misinformation about what that's going to look like. And truthfully, it's, as you said, Dexter and Melba before, that is, Florida actually has a really long history of mailing voting, and it's one of the things that Florida is expecting to get, certainly right. We'll have the results, on time, and so it's just kind of putting all these things together. I think we have a question. Is that right, Anna?
Yes, Betsy Skip wants to know, how might we get rid of redlining?
Somebody else got to take that one.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any easy answers for that one, because I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's more about the redistricting and the redrawing of districts to favor one party over another. There was some activity in the Supreme Court around that in prior iterations, but that was a Supreme Court that included Justice Ginsburg. So I do not see any relief coming from the legal system, which breaks my heart as an attorney to say, but I think that's kind of where we are, because again, this Supreme Court, granted, they did have one ruling, I believe it was in Pennsylvania, where they allowed people to, I think something about the deadlines of when you could drop off the ballot or something like that. So they did have one favorable ruling, but then that was followed immediately by an unfavorable voting rights ruling. So I don't think we can consistently rely on the Supreme Court. So again, this is going to have to go back to electoral politics and making sure you're electing Congress people, because again, who actually are the people that redraws the districts? It's basically Congress. So, you have to make sure that, again, you're voting for people who, want to expand voting rights, not reduce it.
Can I just jump in there? I don't know anything about redlining, but in fact, I understood redlining to be, redlining to be, banks that won't lend money in particular neighborhoods. But I just want to mention something about the court system, because you just mentioned the Supreme Court. I think we're likely to get a ton of lawsuits, probably in Florida, depending on how close the race is, but in other states as well. The Supreme Court has been kind of interesting on this, and I think if you just take the case of Wisconsin in the primary, Wisconsin has a rule which is identical to Florida's, which is if you're any absentee ballot that doesn't arrive on election day is not counted. And so in Florida in 2018, there were thousands of ballots that were coming in after election day, thousands, oceans. And that's going to happen this time. What happened in Wisconsin earlier this year was you had the pandemic and there was a primary, and so people went out to vote, but it was like the election was a mess. That question went all the way to the US Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, go ahead and basically count all the ballots that come in within a certain time period of the election day. So you can't just slam the door on election day. And it turned out that was in Wisconsin, that was close to 80,000 ballots got counted that wouldn't have been counted without that ruling. And so I think it's all going to depend on November 3rd. It's all going to depend on how close the race is. If it's a blowout, then it's a blowout. Then it's done. But if it's close in Florida, if it's close in Pennsylvania, it doesn't look like it's going to be. But that's when it's going to get really, really nasty, and we're going to have a flood of lawsuits. And so potentially we could have Bush Gore in 3 or 4 states if it's close.
And just one more thing. So I answered the question, interpreting redlining to mean gerrymandering.
Right. I think that's what she probably meant. Yeah.
Redlining, and you are right, Dexter, redlining has to do with banks not lending to people of color if they want to purchase a house within a certain geographic area. Yeah. Many banks have been prosecuted or fined as a result of those practices. Many of them have moved away from it. We can't say that the problem's completely been eliminated, but that is a law enforcement issue, probably led by the Department of Justice, which means you have to have an attorney general that's interested in doing that, which means what? Elections, because the attorney general is basically appointed by the president and confirmed by, the Senate. So it still all comes back to voting, no matter what.
I was just going to reiterate that. Just, if we think about gerrymandering, it's this election, it's every election, right? I mean, that at the local level, at the state level, I mean, this is just so necessary each and every time. Anna, do you have a question? Or do we?
We have about 5 minutes left, and I thought I would just ask Melba a quick question about the work that you're doing at FIU. Both you and I think Dexter as well touched on the efforts to suppress the vote on campuses, and I know Dexter treats that in his article as well. Melba, what are you doing at FIU that people can be involved in, and what is your role in terms of these issues that we've been discussing?
Sure. So I serve as the Director of Policy and Programs for the Center for the Administration of Justice, which is housed in SIPA. And I'm working very predominantly on prosecutorial reform. So we have launched a dashboard, which has a set of indicators called the Prosecutorial Performance Indicators. And what it is it's a tool for prosecutors' offices to use for allocation of resources and office management, for measuring outcomes with regards to how are we serving our communities? Are we doing so with equity? What does our diversity look like, not only in line prosecutors, but in the decision-making seats? And most importantly, being a tool for transparency so that communities can see what the trends are and how justice is being administered in their communities. So for me, it's just a continuation of making sure that our government is accessible to everyone and that the voters have the information they need to be able to make a decision, especially when it comes to district attorney and state attorneys races, because so many times, again, it's only in recent history after, you see the protest around this summer over the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, that people are like, wait a minute, the power of a prosecutor. A prosecutor is the one who is in charge of investigating police shootings and figuring out whether or not there is enough evidence to be able to hold the police officer accountable in a court of law. So as people start to really understand the importance of this seat, they need as much information as possible to be able to determine whether or not their elected prosecutor is aligned with their values. So that is what my work at the center really centers around, working with prosecutors to change policy to address issues that have come up within their use of the prosecutorial performance indicators. And also, just as a plug, if folks want to learn more about it, it's prosecutorialperformanceindicators.org. So you can take a look at all the work that we're doing around that, the pilot offices that we have launched, and then the new offices that we'll be taking on over the course of the next few years.
Thank you so much, Melba. Thank you for your work, and thank you, Dexter, for yours, both vital efforts that you have done for all of us. Julio, I will let you have the last word.
I was muted.
Mute yourself.
I just want to thank everyone for this incredible conversation. Get out the vote. The importance of exercising our right to vote, of having our voices heard at this moment in every election, that we continue to fight and support for those people who are ensuring that our democracy continues, and democracy doesn't exist in any kind of stable way unless we continue to fight for it. If I may, just I just got back from, well, not just, it was like 2 weeks ago, from North Carolina. As I was driving back down, one of the things that I kept on seeing in the billboards was kind of the S word, the socialism word that keeps on finding its way. It resonates throughout the country, but particularly resonates in South Florida and parts of Florida in pretty unique ways. If we can put up this slide, Michael, for this upcoming event that we're doing with the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab, The Myths of Socialism, What's in a Word? That's Wednesday, October 28th, where we'll have special guest Peter Slevin, who is also a contributing writer for The New Yorker, and doctors Michael Bustamante and Rebecca Friedman, our director at the WPHL. Please join us for that. You could learn more information at wphl.fiu.edu. Thank you all for, I want Anna to end it. I don't want to end it. Anna has such a better...
Just keep it going. Thank you all for this very necessary conversation, and may everyone stay safe and healthy, and go vote.
Thank you so much. Take care.